Hello, Dr. Zane. Again, I want to review the assessment instruments, the indirect assessment instruments that you find in week 3 here. So pause this video and either print out the different assessments um, or bring them up on your screen, and we'll go through them a little bit. I'm sure you're familiar with at least some of them. They're all quite similar. Um, but let's talk through each one and look at it a little bit. Also, I want to say that I hope you listen to Dr. Dorsey's lecture on functional assessment, functional analysis. Truly excellent information there. He spends a lot of time on the indirect assessments, uh, and I hope you understand the difference between functional assessment and functional analysis. Functional assessment is the broader term of things we do, methodologies we implement to determine the potential function of a problem behavior. And then under the umbrella term of functional assessment, we have indirect methods. And under indirect methods, we have the MAS, the FAST, the QBF, QABF. And then under functional assessment, we have direct methods, which is like ABC analysis, scatter plots. And then under the umbrella term functional assessment, a third way of doing a functional assessment is functional analysis. So keep in mind that difference between indirect and direct. Recall that you'll be implementing both methods for any sort of functional assessment you do on a target individual. You'll do some indirect methods, you'll do direct methods, and if you are capable and have the opportunity to, you'll do a systematic functional analysis. So let's look first at the functional analysis checklist for teachers. The facts part A. So step 1, step 2, step 3. Here the problem behaviors are categorized, and under describe problem behavior we'll operationally define it there. And step 4 then is where most of your data come in. The schedule in which the time of day, the activity, and here we identify the likelihood of problem behavior and which behavior problem might occur there if you rate it as a high likelihood. And you can see where we're going with this. If we list some activities in which the behavior never happens, and we list some activities where it's highly likely to happen, then we can begin to think about the variables associated with each setting or activity, and that may help us lean towards one particular function or another. Okay. Step 5, select 1 to 3 routines for further assessment. So after you have the data in step 4, you select from them one or more of those that have a high likelihood of the behavior. And now we do go to part B. For each routine, we'll fill out one of these part B forms, right? The routine or context and the problem behavior. Now we're drilling down deep into that routine where we might have problems. So this form is kind of different from the MAS, you see. So we get some basic information. The teacher, the respondent, needs to identify the different times and schedules, routines during the day, and tell us whether the behavior could be happening or not be happening in each of those. For any of the times of day where the behavior is likely to happen, then you drill down further with part B here, and you get more detailed information in terms of predictors and consequences, and here you summarize the behavior and come up with your potential hypothesis, okay? And then the last page are the instructions, okay? So it's a nice way, again, to organize information that respondents would give you. It's an indirect methods. So now let's look at the problem behavior questionnaire. This is another indirect method, and it's how many questions? There's 15 questions. Most of these MAS type forms have 16. So it's very close to that. Again, as usual, there's a place to operationally define the behavior. And then if you look at these questions, they're going to match very closely MAS and FAST and the QABF. Does the problem behavior occur and persist when you make a request to perform a task? As you are knowing, each question is kind of tied to one of the functions, and inside of a zero, it has a 0 to 6 scale. Never, 10%, 25%, 50%, and so forth. So you rate, the respondent rates the, to what extent each question is true or relates to different, how much likelihood is there of the problem behavior occurring. And then with the profile, look at, it's interesting. We divide it up by peers. So what could be the maintaining consequences when in the context of peers and in the context of adults, and you even get some information about setting events. So this is kind of interesting. It's a bit of a spin-off from the MAS because not only, although we're using similar questions, now we're doing a finer analysis of the information, right? In terms of the context of peers, adults, and we're actually getting some information on setting events. So that's kind of a nice evolution of an indirect method, okay? So let's now look at the QABF form. And it's very similar to the MAS, except we have a few more questions, all right? And you rate it from a does not apply or never too often, a place for target behavior, all right? And then if you look at the QABF mental illness form by Matson and Singh, let's look at this. So we have the same type of rating scale, 0 to 4, and we have 25 questions. And then we have the scoring sheet at the bottom. It's very similar to the scoring sheets you've seen on the functional analysis checklist for teachers and the MAS if you're familiar with it, the FAST and so forth. And we get total scores per function, and of course a function with the highest score wins. So that form is pretty understandable, I think. The manual comes along with it, so you can use that. Now remember the FAST. That was developed by Awad and his people, a spin-off from the motivational assessment scale, right? But it looks almost the same. A little bit more information in the top of the left-hand column, where you have information about the informant-client relationship. Again, a space to operationally define the problem behaviors, situations in which it occurs, least likely, most likely, that sort of thing. And then we have the questions, an abbreviated scale instead of 0 to 6. It's basically yes, no, or not applicable. So it's a bit rougher that way, more gross, but you still have your scoring summary at the bottom, and the function with the highest score wins, as usual. So that's the FAST. And then the last one is the MAS, Motivational Assessment Scale. The first one, it's really nice that you're reading the Duran and Crimmins article where they talk about it for the very first time and how they provide some assessment data on how able it is to predict function of behavior. So these are great methods, as Dorsey said at the end. Although they don't have really great reliability and validity, we always probably want to use these. They're a quick way to assess function, to get some information. What I usually do, I think it's probably common practice, you have 2 or more people independently fill out the MAS for one target behavior on one individual. Compare not the raw scores. Don't compare the raw scores. Just compare the identified function from each rater. So if rater 1 says attention is highest and rater 2 says escape is highest, then you don't have a match. Don't rate total scores per category. Just rate the identified function. But you'll be using at least 2 of these for your functional assessment project. Don't really care which. If I were you, I would take a simpler rating scale like the MAS or the FAST, but then also the functional analysis checklist for teachers or the problem behavior questionnaire where you get more detailed data in terms of peers, adults, and setting events, or when you drill down into the routines. Okay? So I hope this quick review helped. I think you're quite familiar with them, and I feel like I don't need to spend too much time with them. But you've got the forms. Drop questions or comments about them. In the forms. I'd be particularly interested in learning what forms you've used and how they've worked out for you. Okay?